I really see Mary Magdalene not as some scandalous little cult, spirituality to get involved with, but as someone who's going to serve a whole bunch of people, men and women, all genders, over the next era. I think we're going to discover a lot of things about her that will serve a lot of people.
Okay. 1, 2, ready, go.
Welcome to the Called to Be Bad podcast. My name is Mariah Martin, and I feel called to be bad. It turns out I'm not the only one. Join us as we dig into all things bad, scandalous, deviant, the stuff that makes good church folks squirm in the sanctuary. Why? Well, because sometimes the scandalous is spiritual, deviant is divine, and bad is beautiful. Say yes to the call, and let's see what holds. Hi, Frances.
Hi, Mariah.
Welcome to Called to Be Bad.
It's so good to be here. I love what you're doing, and I'm so excited to be a part of it. I'm grateful.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. So this is Frances Cutshaw. She is the founder and director of the Order of St. Hildegard, a modern, unorthodox, dispersed spiritual community emphasizing spiritual wholeness and leadership development for those estranged by, recovering from, or transforming religious institutions, which sounds like it fits Called to Be Bad pretty perfectly.
Yes.
Frances has a background in pastoral ministry, the arts, social work, nonprofit, leadership, yoga, and meditation, and is a certified Dare to Lead facilitator. And that's Brene Brown's program, isn't it?
Yes, I'm putting in a little plug right there on my shirt. Yes.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Got some merch going.
Yeah.
She operates alongside an incredible team as a wilderness abbess. Abbess? Is that how you say that? Abbess?
That's my, frivolous way of saying it. Wilderness abbess.
I like it.
It's funny when you put it together.
Wilderness abbess. I like it. And she's pursuing her Doctor of Ministry with an emphasis on creating refuge spaces amid world crises. So we are talking about Mary Magdalene and feminism. Or how did you say it? Like a feminism centered on Mary Magdalene? Or what? How did you say it again?
I think so. I really am just playing with the language a little bit for what it means to be, how much Mary Magdalene has impacted or traveled alongside my feminist journey. Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. I love it. So before we get into Mary Magdalene, which I cannot wait, let's introduce our drinks. What are you drinking today, Frances?
Okay, I am drinking Raspberry Emergency today.
Are you battling the colds?
Some people around me are, and I'm drinking it out of my Wild Goose Festival cup, which is fun because they're such a cool group. So,
what is that? I'm not familiar.
The Wild Goose Festival is a spirit justice, music, and art festival and conference in North Carolina, and it's right up your alley. Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you more about it at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. I love Emergency, and I discovered recently Hot Emergency, like putting hot water, like using it like tea. And I don't know what inspired me to do that, but I did. And my sister thinks that it sounds so gross, but it's really good. And it's very comforting when you're like, especially if you're cold and like battling a cold.
Yeah. That sounds great.
That and the chili ramen, which is like, I don't know, it's not necessarily like good for you, but especially if you have like a head cold and if you like spicy things, it can like, anyways.
Listen, there's a lot of that in this house, so yeah.
Yeah. That's Mariah's flu tips of the day.
Nice. Chili ramen, some Hot Emergency. Love it.
Yeah. And I'm drinking coffee. It's particularly hot today because I squeezed in making it right before we recorded. And I have a dark blue mug with a bunny looking at a moon on it. And my sister gave this to me. And so I was like playing like a word association game with my mugs. I was like, feminism, Mary Magdalene, feminism, women, sisters. Sierra. And she just had a birthday recently. So, because I kind of like to correlate my mugs if I can. And so got one with my sister. As we talk about feminism and maybe sisterhood. I don't know, maybe not. But.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, beloved baddies. A quick break to tell you that this episode is sponsored by the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul, a nonprofit that supports and amplifies the voices of edgewalkers through art that catalyzes change, laughter that brings us together, and soul awakening to the creative spark within us. The support from the Center for Art, Humor, and Soul has meant the world to this podcast, so I highly encourage you to check out their website, arthumorandsoul.com, to see their other featured artists and projects. If you want to support the podcast, you can check out our Patreon or get in touch. Now I'll let you get back to this episode of Called to be Bad. So how do you define feminism? And I always say it doesn't have to be the perfect textbook definition, just like how you use that word.
Well, I want to say I use it cautiously because I'm very aware, and I'd like to be more aware of how feminism has left out a lot of voices over the years. Mm-hmm. So for me, when I say feminism, I'm speaking about a journey that has been informed by womanist theology as well, and needs to be much more informed, as well as indigenous spiritualities. And it's not just, the white church that I grew up in. And I certainly didn't get feminism from all my church experiences either. But for me, it has been a personal journey of resilience coming out of trauma as a woman in leadership. But obviously, in general, I consider myself in solidarity with women everywhere who want to make their own recovery together. I mean, that's really what it's about, is recovering together from centuries of being told that we're not enough. So.
Feminism as recovery. I don't know if I've ever heard that as a definition. Like the healing that comes with feminism. I like that.
Yeah.
And so how does Mary Magdalene come to play? And let's just like quick give a background, like who is the person of Mary Magdalene? And then we can get into what does she have to do with feminism?
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, I speak, I guess, as a Christian of upbringing and a more interspiritual Christian-rooted person now. But Mary Magdalene historically was Jesus's closest companion if you take her gospel seriously, as well as some extra resources beyond our canonized scripture. But even if you are only going with what we have and the sort of traditional canons that we have of scripture, Mary Magdalene was certainly one of Jesus's closest disciples, a woman who has a story that has been told and retold in many different ways, but we know was present to him through his entire, through the experience of teaching and then being crucified and resurrected as it's told in the Gospels. So a woman who was, some people thought, because of the way the scriptures are written, and until recently everyone has believed was called Mary Magdalene because of where she was from. And now scholarship is suggesting that she was called Mary Magdalene because that was a title. And so I'll get more into that later, but there's a lot. There's a lot going on with MM right now. So
with MM.
Yeah.
That's cute. I also like it because my initials are MM, so Mary Magdalene. Anyways.
Oh, they are. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And I've never called her MM before until today. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm ready to like jump in and learn about Mary Magdalene because I think that there is a tradition somewhere that she was a prostitute, but it never says that in scripture as far as my scholarship goes.
Yeah, I think, and the thing is, I want to say that I'm not, even though I've been to seminary like you, and even though I'm still in seminary, seminary again, I should say, I'm not a scholar. I think it's okay to say that I'm a scholar of Mary Magdalene, but I'm not an expert. I'm not a subject matter expert on her, and I'm not someone who's ever been really good with recalling the details that formed my thoughts. So I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings about her, but going back and telling you why. So but I will say, we know that she has been referred to as everything from a prostitute to just a scandalous woman, or, and then it's just really questionable what's been written about her. But she was certainly a companion and a beloved companion and disciple above all else, kind of regardless. So, And the whole prostitute thing never existed, and they had to that's been retracted. So even though I'm going to say this is part of my feminist walk with Mary Magdalene. I think depending on where you are in your journey, that could have been a liberating thing to hear, even though it turned out not to be true. And it's easy for me now to say, well, of course they called her a scandalous woman and a prostitute and focused on sexual sin or whatnot in different interpretations and misinterpretations of her. There were times when that served me very well. And there are other times in more recent times where I've reflected back on some of those things and said, well, of course, because either asexualizing or sexualizing women, either one, right? So it can be harmful. Yeah.
Right. It's the whole virginal Mary versus Delilah or the temptress. It's women in general, and often biblical women get put in these categories when we are so much more than that. And I like that you bring up that point. There's also this who cares if she was a prostitute? You know, that does not denigrate, that does not take away from her ministry or her relationship with Jesus or, the offense at the idea of her being a prostitute. I'm just now putting together, it's very, anti-sex work. And,
it is. It is. Yeah, it's amazing how, we're changing so much, and some of us are trying to be so fluid in our perspective and receptive of different thoughts on sexuality and expressions of sexuality as we're growing and reconstructing or being resilient in today's world. And so one day we may be offended by something, and then the next day we realize, well, but wait a minute, what does that say? So I'm trying to remain really fluid in my receiving of who she is. And grateful for the way that it's affected me all along the way.
Yeah. Now my brain's going on this whole bunny trail about being anti-sex work is actually kind of anti-women or anyways. So I'm curious, before we go even deeper into to Mary Magdalene and her life and feminism, how did you kind of connect with her originally? Is there a story there for you? Or how has she impacted your own personal journey?
I was very aware of my interest in Mary Magdalene before I awakened to naming some of the things that had happened to me. When I was in my first marriage, I had an experience of a clergy mentor technically sexually assaulting me, and then that turning into a toxic relationship, which, because I was married at the time, I labeled it as an affair. And I said, I'm responsible for this. And I didn't like the vulnerability of being a victim. And so what I did with that situation was I just packaged it up neatly, dealt with it, honest, move on. And it took years to recognize the damage that had been done because of that power differential and the influence that that person had over me. And the fact that I didn't have a no for that person. I didn't have a no. I wasn't able to offer that just wasn't in my thinking. I was a people pleaser. He was an influential person. And I think for me, I didn't really realize what had happened. I hadn't put a name on it. I hadn't called it what it was. And so there was a pretty long time period in my life where I was very disempowered. I was very unsure of how to interact in the church, how to be a leader, how to be a woman, how to be married, how to be, sexual, non-sexual, whatever, just how to be me. And Mary Magdalene for a while annoyed me because I always felt like she was kind of kicking around in the shadows with me, and I didn't know what to make of her. But that's because she was really a reflection on myself and me trying to figure out who I was, and how, and really, as I have journeyed with discovering more about her, my story has kind of followed, and I think this is true for a lot of women, the same arc of, am I scandalous? Am I a leader? Do I have a voice? Am I just a problem? Do I have all these demons, or am I really just called to be more, and I can't find the community that will receive me for who I really am? That whole story for me has been what brought me to today. Wherever I was in my healing journey from that, Mary Magdalene was like a mirror for that, for me. So whereas now I feel like I have a voice in the world, and I've integrated some of my pain into something that can serve other people, I'm starting to be curious about what she really had to say. And I'm not worried about her being a threat to me in some way like I did years ago. I thought, well, that's just Mary Magdalene cult stuff. It was internalized misogyny.
So you'd already been learning about Mary Magdalene, but through the harm, she kind of stayed with you through the pain of what happened. What did it take till you got to how did you find your no?
Oh, that's a great question, because for a while I found it through armor. So Brene Brown teaches a lot about armor. I found it through nobody can hurt me. I'm responsible for what happened there, which there was some learning about what I was and was not responsible for in that situation. And then I think, though, for a while I blamed what happened on how liberal-minded I had been straight out of seminary. And so I kind of ran and hid in a community where I would have told you I couldn't recognize it at the time, but I ran and hid in communities that were more conservative about women. I decided that, rules and boundaries keep you safe from making mistakes, because I was a scandalous person. Obviously I needed better boundaries. I needed better walls. And for a while, maybe that worked because I did continue to grow in some areas of my life. But I think looking back, it was armor, and it was a way of protecting myself from making mistakes, because I started to believe that, making mistakes is what gets you in trouble. Making mistakes is what makes, things go bad. And I lost my voice during that time. So I guess when I think about Mary Magdalene, I thought of her as a scandalous archetype to walk with at the time. I kind of liked it, but she was sort of in the closet for me. She's not just an archetype. I mean, she was a real human being with a real spirit that's alive, in eternity. And so I don't want to just market her that way. That's not fair. But yeah, I think as I started to find my voice and name what had happened and see a more complete story of myself, Mary Magdalene, the mirror, really began to become more complete and whole to me. I can't make sense of the timing of that because I didn't orchestrate it, but it is beautiful.
So at the time, her kind of mirror self, what she mirrored back to you was another person that you experienced as kind of scandalous. And so it was almost like companionship, like I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And like even in her if she is a scandalous person,
Right.
she was still so close to Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even in her scandal, she had that deep, profound relationship, whatever it may have looked like.
Yeah.
Which I could see that resonating if you are finding your identity in this kind of or trying to find your identity in this scandal. You're like, hey, there's this woman.
And then I got sick of her. There were a couple times when I wrote, I remember writing a blog post saying, I've been in a Mary Magdalene phase and I'm going to cut my hair off. I don't even know what I was talking about. I was just being, my artistic, expressive self saying, I think I'm done with my Mary Magdalene phase. I remember wanting to her because I think I just thought, well, I can't be that vulnerable, sensual, hidden problem of a woman anymore. And I really remember that. And now I think that, well, first of all, regardless of whether we view her sexually or asexually or somewhere in between, I don't care. Like I am at a point in my life now where I know that I'm a sexual human being. I have every desire to be exactly who I am. I mean, I have a family, I have commitments and boundaries and health and recovery. But I also, part of that is making peace with that woman who hid herself and being determined not to do that to the extent that's appropriate for where I am and comfortable for me in my life today. I won't hide. I'll make a door where there's not a door, And I really see Mary Magdalene not as some scandalous little cult, spirituality to get involved with, but as someone who's going to serve a whole bunch of people, men and women, all genders, over the next era. I think we're going to discover a lot of things about her that will serve a lot of people because we don't have all the information yet.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Yeah. I don't remember the original point of connection growing up in the church, but I do distinctly remember knowing at some point that she felt like more than just a character in the Bible to me. She felt very much alive. And I do specifically remember, like maybe in seminary, which I went in 2000, I graduated in 2000. So in a whole season post-seminary, it was almost archetypal, except that I don't want to limit her presence even in that way. I felt her. I felt intuitively a sense of her, and always kind of wrestled with what that really meant for me. Like, what does that mean? Why do I feel this connection to her? Yeah. And I've met so many women who feel the same way.
I talk about my relationship with scripture or the Bible as one of wrestling. Like, I don't do devotional Bible study because I just get angry and I just want to throw my Bible. And instead I do more Bible study where I if I actually learn the context, and why certain things were written or said or done, and then it makes more sense to me. And through my study, I've connected with certain biblical women kind of at that like spiritual level, but I don't know that I would have put that label on it. So I'm grateful for that like, oh, like these women stood out to me and felt like a friend, or they kind of accompanied me on these like certain learnings. And for me, it's the woman who anointed Jesus's feet and or head, depending on which version you read, if they are the same women. And Jesus said, this story will be told in memory of her, even though she's unnamed. And I love that. I love that story. I did I called it like a spoken word, like with a capital word, like a play on the Bible, about her and from her perspective, and the Pharisee who like looked, it was a Pharisee, who kind of like looked down on her, and Jesus was like, no, please, she's done a beautiful thing. So her, and then also Delilah, speaking of Delilah, and it's amazing how I can so struggle with the Bible. And yet there are these women like Mary Magdalene and others who it's like they reach out and they cling on to us. And like, I don't know if they actually walked the earth or not, or if they're a conglomeration of a type of woman or what, but their truth persists. It has lasted the ages and touches something in our hearts. And so I'm so glad you're bringing that to light because I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I felt a lot of freedom because I was raised by English teacher parents who were into literature and,
yes.
You know, I mean, I was always encouraged to think for myself and I was never in a very oppressive church situation, but even so, the church as it is in America, even in more, say, friendly, open spaces, there was still kind of a vibe that I got where I wouldn't dare take it beyond what was being taught. I wouldn't dare consider, you know, and there wasn't a whole lot of, for me, I know it's different for everybody. Some people are drawn to this and some aren't, but there wasn't a whole lot of teaching about what that could feel like or what that could look like if someone from the Bible, like, I don't know, appealed to you or you felt like a spiritual connection.
Ooh, sorry.
We're both having it. Let me just.
I know. I'm like, my nose is like dripping. I don't know if it's allergies or maybe you're passing on your cold to me through the screen. It's like empathy sniffles or something.
Yeah. I was like sitting here going, oh gosh, I'm going to cough again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just, archetypal, spiritual. I mean, for me, part of being bad was breaking away from the intellectual stoicism of the churches that I grew up in. And I've broken down all kinds of, I went deep into the New Age stuff for a while and then came back, deep into evangelical charismatic stuff and then came back.
Oh.
And, somewhere along all this, like a spirituality that still allows me to find a place for Mary Magdalene to be a presence that's really like literally with me and with other women.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So to kind of sum up what you were saying about Mary Magdalene and your story, she has become an important figure, both spiritually and your own like self-understanding and feminism, and has kind of moved beyond the pages of the Bible into like actively into your spiritual life. Yeah. So why her? Why her? Like of all?
I think in the beginning, maybe, I don't know that I know the why. Let's put it that way. I do think that maybe me discovering the why has been part of the joy. But yeah, I think her closeness with Jesus as a woman probably on some level seemed very different than what we were actually being taught, right? I mean, or at least I should say what people in the typical American church were being taught. No amount of good parenting could undo the message I was taking from Christianity in the United States. And that was that a woman like Mary Magdalene had to be kind of, managed in the scriptures. That's what the picture that I got. Like, let's manage her. Let's explain her in a way that doesn't make her quite as important as she really feels like she is if you're taking in the scripture.
So instead of like kind of an embarrassed, like, this is why she was in there, kind of like, no, this is why she is in there, that she serves a purpose, and not just as as a side character, but like there's more going on there. Is that kind of where
I have to say I've really bought into the belief that she was extremely close to Jesus. I don't have to have it one way or the other. You know how there's a whole strain of folks out there who are certain that they were actually romantic and that there was a child. And then there's other folks who say, no way, and then try to make stories up about her. I'm somewhere in the middle where she doesn't have to be sexual or unsexual. She doesn't have to be anything other than what it appears she was, which is extremely beloved. And if that's the case, then where where's her gospel? And I think that I always wanted to know where her gospel was. So my part of being bad is believing that the gospel that's been discovered is actually hers. That's just me. But I do believe the gospel of Mary is Mary's gospel.
Okay. Yeah, so there's strains of thought that think or that propose that she could have been married to Jesus, right? Yeah.
And of course that's the whole, I'm not in any way saying anything diminutive about that strain of thought. Absolutely need to be true. But I am not wed to that like some folks are, like kind of clutching onto it. Or maybe folks have more information than I do. Okay. There is a lot of information out there about that. But there's another strain, which is kind of more where I am, which is there's a huge oral tradition surrounding Mary Magdalene and what really happened with her, what she wrote about her life with Jesus, and then what happened to her afterwards. And that oral tradition brings her into France after the crucifixion and living in France. And there's just a huge amount of information and oral tradition surrounding the places where she's believed to have lived and interacted in France, which just sounds so crazy when you first hear it. But that's the tradition that I am paying attention to right now. Not for scholarship so much as I'm more interested because I feel like she's been hidden from us. And so I'm curious, you know, if someone's telling me there's a lot of information, I'm thinking, well, why would I be quick to belittle that? Why would I, what was it within me in the 90s when I first heard about this? No, not the 90s, in the early 2000s. That was quick to shuffle it off and say, oh, that sounds cultish. That sounds, well, I think for me then it was a little more misogyny internalized than it was any real red flags that this might not be true. That's just my personal feeling about it. So.
Right. And do you think there is some like residual, like, I think there would be a nugget in my brain that would say, well, it's outside of the canon, you know, so, so kind of like, and I would argue with that, but I think that, that nugget would be there of like, but that doesn't mean like, I think how I would argue with that nugget, that is a one weird sentence.
You're arguing with a nugget.
What I would say to that, I'm arguing with a nugget. Oh my gosh. Make a t-shirt. I think what I would say to that is like, that doesn't mean you can't still be curious about it and learn from her. And and study that. And
we're, yes. Okay. So I guess what I'm feeling right now as I'm talking about this is that I am very careful and analytical as a person. And so for years, I would never have, you know, it's accepted. We've just accepted it. They did their scholarship. The canon is the canon. And I mean, I really, you know, I bought that. And like I said, I'm an analytical person. So I'm not just given to woo-woo anything. Right. I'll try things because I want to know why people said they were bad. But I'll figure it out and I'll backtrack and I'll say, okay, that one probably. But in this case, no, for me, and this is where I am after, you know, and a lot of this has changed in the last 10 years. I no longer accept that women's voices have been present and influential in the decisions of the early church and in those committees.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry. Can you say that again? That felt really important, and I don't want to disrupt it with a sneeze.
I am no longer bothered by venturing outside of what the decisions were that were made by those early church councils and conferences and, you know, pretty much all the canon workshops by the old white dudes. Well, canon workshops. They weren't all old and white, to be fair, but and that's ageist anyway, but you know what I'm getting at here.
Yeah.
I am absolutely.
It was not a diverse body of people agreeing on how scripture is canonized. Yeah, I gotcha.
No, and I mean, if women are anything that sounded vulnerable, unusual, threatening to uniformity was involved, I truly believe that those would have been labeled heretical, even if they were not. Okay, what's the point in even calling something heretical? It's someone else's experience of God and Christ. Why would it not have been considered valuable? Why do we have to uniform anything? Why do we have to colonize anything, right? So I don't trust it anymore. And so I'm excited when I hear that Mary's gospel has been found in multiple locations with the same page torn out. And I'm excited when I read in other scriptures that were left out, that Mary was as important to Jesus as they claim she was. And as far as a resource on that, if we want to stay in the traditional route, Diana Butler Bass, who's, an established scholar, has just released an incredible blog post and sermon, which was at the Wild Goose Festival, which I heard in person, on Mary. Her friend Elizabeth Shrader has discovered something in the original text of John that indicates that Mary was the presence of Mary was more uniform than not, and that Martha wasn't even meant to be in that text as a sister of Lazarus. So I'm not going to get into pulling that apart, but I highly recommend Diana Butler Bass, Mary the Tower on Substack explains it. Okay. And that's the kind of thing when you start to realize that people literally rewrote scripture and wrote Mary out of scripture, that makes you wonder.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the people who might be listening who, and this is part of why I made the podcast, because I found this in myself. Like, people have been hurt by religion, hurt by the Bible, hurt by the view of Jesus that I think you were getting at. It gives me hope that the person of Mary Magdalene gives a window into your own spirituality and your own healing and recovery and wellness and how that interacts with you and your experience of being a woman and feminism. And it is encouraging to me that is found in the Bible of all places, or supplemented by extra biblical sources. I think what's important about spirituality is that it connects you to that healing and wholeness. And if you don't experience that in the Bible and scripture, you don't have to go there to try and find it. But yeah, it has lit up a curiosity in me. I want to learn more about Mary Magdalene. And it's also a breath of fresh air, because I think a lot of times I sit in that kind of frustration with the church and Bible and even spirituality and feeling like disconnected, because if you're taught like this is how to experience spirituality, and if that's not working for you, it's nice to be reminded there are other ways to connect, and that they don't have to feel dangerous or it's okay if they feel a little bad, but that doesn't mean you're going to hell in a handbasket,
Right. Well, I mean, I always say to people, if there's one of the greatest gifts that God, the way that I understand God and the way that I prayed to God my whole life, the God I was introduced to in the traditional Christian church that I took very seriously and prayed to a lot, right? The greatest gift that God ever gave me was prayer, because through my life, I can say there was a point of handoff. I can say that I was praying and I was doing the things Jesus taught us to do when this shift happened. It wasn't like I was off on some wild tangent, and that would have been fine. I think wild tangents are great, but it's always a good grace to be able to say, I know that the God that I was taught to know and love and worship is the one that led me here.
Yeah. So I think like people on the deconstruction journey, a lot of the warning against that is that you're going to kind of become untethered and drift off in the kind of slippery slope mentality. And your experience has shown you that there is a grounding. You can trust yourself. You can trust your relationship with God or your spirituality, and that it will pull you back to center, you know, and you will come back with gifts, you know, no matter where you explore, you will learn. Yeah.
It's a privileged person's perspective because in many ways when I was young, when we are forming a lot of our ideas about the world and when our beliefs are really being solidified, I wasn't harmed by the church much at that age. It was in my adulthood that I went through my traumas. And so there was more foundation there for me to build on. But I do think that when people have extreme church trauma, I wouldn't want them to take from it that I'm saying, you know, keep praying the way you were taught or keep doing what you were taught in any way. I think we can trust whatever unfolds within us. As long as I think it's more important to root out shame and to do that work. And that's where Brene Brown's work has been so critical, because it's more important that we root out the shame, because that's what's really in the way of hearing spirit.
Does Mary Magdalene touch on any of that, like the experience with shame?
The work that I've done in shame has been started with Brene Brown. And, you know, her work, her grounded research on shame was life-changing for me, absolutely life-changing. And so that's why I followed her and became certified in her work. I think that when we start to recognize shame in our bodies and the systems around us, you start to see it more in what you're studying. So, I started to see not only the way that the church had handled Mary Magdalene with shame, but also I was open to reading these extra sources. And in the Gospel of Mary, if you take it seriously, and you don't have to, but if you decide to, there is a very clear passage in which Mary is talking about her experience of Jesus and his teachings, and Peter doubts her, and it makes her cry, and she experiences a moment of shame, but then she stands up and pushes back against it, and it's just beautiful. So I think for people not to have that resource, it's worth looking into.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Mary interacting with Peter in that way.
Peter the rock, and Mary, who Diana Butler Bass says is the tower. So
the rock and the tower. I like the kind of metaphors that have surfaced. Like you talked about Mary Magdalene for a period being a mirror, and kind of seeing yourself in her, seeing her in you, and learning more about yourself through the woman of Mary Magdalene. And then also like learning about her as a tower. And when you think of tower, you think of something that stands firm and strong, and like, and so maybe your no is in that tower, you know,
yeah. And you did ask me, where's my no? And it's funny because I didn't answer your question. I apologize, but I think my no came with boundaries. My no came with the combination of deciding I will be heard, but also, we'll see Brene Brown's work, the work on shame. It allows us to know what we want, and it also allows us to know what we don't want, like have a mind of our own, right? And so the no is the no is also a yes. The no is also a yes. And so I think for a while my no was hiding. And I think now my no is anything that gets in the way of what I can trust in my body and my spirit in co-creation with God. So it's not one particular no.
Your no is no longer hiding. Your yes is no longer hiding. You're standing firm and tall, like a tower. Would it be okay if I end our time today, Frances, with a blessing for you and all the baddies out there viewing and listening to this episode?
Yes.
Okay. Frances and all of you beautiful, bad human beings, may you go from this episode knowing that you are held and carried and seen in the spirit of Mary Magdalene, in the person who is both mirror and tower. May you be lit up with curiosity for the ways that you can learn about yourself as you maybe learn about her or learn about feminism, and know that you will remain tethered in the spirit of what is truly good, and by truly good I mean truly bad. Yeah.
All right.
Amen.
So be it. Thank you.
So be it. May it be so. Yeah.
As above, so below. Thank you so much, Mariah.
Yeah. Thanks, Frances, for being on. Okay. That's all for this episode of Called to Be Bad. Keep being your bad, beautiful selves, and I will see you next time.